Poor mom takes her daughter to work to help with homework. What the billionaire does next shocks everyone. The alarm clock went off at 5 in the morning, as always. Rosie opened her eyes in the dark and felt the familiar weight in her body. It wasn't pain exactly. It was an accumulated exhaustion, the kind that settles in your bones and doesn't leave with a night's sleep. She got up slowly, trying not to make a sound. The apartment was small, just 2 rooms, but it was theirs. Grace was still sleeping on the sofa bed, her blonde hair spread across the pillow, her breathing soft. Rosie paused for a moment just to watch her. Her daughter was the only beautiful thing in her life. In the bathroom, she washed her face with cold water. The mirror showed a woman in her early 30s who looked like she was in her late 40s. Rough hands, deep, dark circles, shoulders always tense. She tied her brown hair into a low ponytail and put on the navy blue uniform she wore every day. Janitor. That's what the name tag on her chest said. When she returned to the living room, Grace was already awake. The girl sat on the edge of the sofa, rubbing her bright eyes with her small hands. "Good morning, Mom." "Good morning, my love. Want some milk?" Grace nodded. Rosie went to the tiny kitchen and heated the milk on the old, creaky stove. She put 2 spoonfuls of chocolate mix into the cup and stirred until it dissolved. When she handed it to her daughter, Grace held it with both hands and drank slowly, her eyes still sleepy. "Is there school today?" Rosie asked, though she already knew the answer. "Yes. The teacher said we're going to learn how to do addition." Rosie smiled. Grace loved school. She loved the notebooks, the colored pencils, the stories the teacher told. And Rosie did everything she could to keep her daughter going, even when money was tight. She made a simple cheese sandwich, wrapped it in a napkin, and put it in the girl's backpack along with a small water bottle. Then she helped Grace put on her school uniform. A blue skirt, a white blouse, little black shoes. The girl looked like a doll. At 6:30, they left. The air was still cold, and Rosie pulled the thin jacket over Grace's shoulders. They walked 3 blocks to the bus stop. There was almost no one on the street, just the baker opening his shop and a man sweeping the sidewalk. But when they arrived at the daycare, Rosie felt her stomach tighten. There was a note taped to the gate, "Closed today for emergency maintenance. We apologize for the inconvenience." She stood there, reading the words over and over, as if they might change. Grace tugged at the hem of her coat. "What's wrong, Mom?" "The daycare isn't opening today, sweetie." "So I'm not going to school." Rosie took a deep breath. She thought quickly. She had no neighbor to leave Grace with, no family nearby, no one. "You're coming to work with me, okay?" Grace's face broke into a small smile. "Really, I'm going to see where you work." "Yes, but you have to be quiet. Understand? Very well behaved. I promise." They took the bus that went downtown. Grace sat on Rosie's lap, looking out the window, pointing at everything. The tall buildings, the cars, the people rushing to catch the subway. Rosie just listened, nodding her head, but her mind was elsewhere. She knew taking her daughter to work wasn't ideal. She knew it could cause trouble, but she had no choice. The building where Rosie worked was on a busy avenue, all glass and steel. It was imposing, modern, the kind of place she would never imagine entering if it wasn't to clean it. She went through the side entrance, the service one, and waved to the security guard. "Morning, Rosie." "Morning, Mr. Peterson." He looked at Grace with curiosity. "Is this your little girl?" "Yes, her daycare didn't open today." "I see. All right, you can go up. Just don't let her make a mess, okay?" "Don't worry." They went up in the service elevator. Grace held Rosie's hand tightly, looking at everything with wide eyes. When the doors opened on the 10th floor, the girl gave a little jump. "Wow, Mom! It's so nice here." The hallway was wide, with marble floors and white walls. The office doors were frosted glass, with golden plaques. Rosie pulled Grace by the hand. "Come on, let's go to the supply closet." The supply closet was at the end of the hall. It was a cramped little room filled with cleaning products, buckets, brooms, and rags. Rosie put her bag in the metal locker and got her cart with the supplies. Grace looked at everything, curious. "Do you clean all this by yourself?" "I do. 3 floors. That must be tiring, huh?" Rosie ran a hand through her daughter's blonde hair. "It is, but it's okay. Now sit here in this chair and be quiet while I work, okay?" "Okay." Grace sat in an old little chair in the corner of the closet. She took her notebook out of her backpack and started flipping through the pages. Rosie went out, pushing the cart, but kept an eye on her. Every time she passed by the hallway, she peeked in to make sure her daughter was okay. The work was the same as always. Emptying trash cans, cleaning bathrooms, wiping down desks, vacuuming carpets. The people who worked there barely looked at her. To them, Rosie was invisible, just another member of the cleaning staff, and she preferred it that way. She didn't like attention, but Grace couldn't stay still for long. After half an hour, she appeared in the hallway, her notebook under her arm. "Mom, can I stay near you?" Rosie looked around. No one was nearby. "Okay, but don't go into the offices, you hear?" "Okay." The girl sat on the hallway floor, leaning against the wall, drawing in her notebook. Rosie continued working, always keeping an eye on her. Sometimes Grace would get up and come show her a drawing, a house and a flower, a sun with a happy face. Rosie always praised it, even with her hands wet and her face sweaty. When noon came, Rosie took a break. She sat on the floor next to Grace and shared the sandwich she had brought. They ate in silence, sharing the water bottle. "Mom, do you like working here?" Rosie chewed slowly before answering. "It's a job, sweetie. It pays the bills." "But do you like it?" "It's not about liking it. It's about needing it." Grace was quiet for a moment. Then she opened her notebook to a page full of numbers. "Mommy, can you help me?" Rosie felt her chest tighten. "With what, honey?" "My homework. The teacher gave us some math problems to do." Rosie looked at the notebook. She saw the numbers, but they didn't make sense. They never did. She had never learned to read properly, never learned to do math. Her life was always about something else. Working, surviving, caring. "Not now, sweetie. We'll do it at home, okay?" "But you promised on the bus." "I know. We'll do it later." Grace didn't insist. She closed the notebook and went back to drawing, but Rosie saw the disappointment on the girl's face, and that hurt more than any physical exhaustion. The afternoon passed slowly. Rosie finished cleaning the 10th floor and went down to the 9th. Grace stayed with her, always quiet, always well-behaved. But the guilt wouldn't leave Rosie's mind. The promise she had made. The help she couldn't give. When they got to the 8th floor, it was already past 3 in the afternoon. Rosie was tired, but she still had to finish. Grace was sitting on the hallway floor again, flipping through her notebook. She looked up at her mom with those bright eyes full of hope. "Mom, can you help me now?" Rosie stopped. She dropped the floor cloth. She looked at her daughter. She saw the hope, the trust, the innocence, and she couldn't put it off any longer. "Okay, come here." They sat on the floor, leaning against the wall. Grace opened the notebook to the homework page. They were simple addition problems, 2 + 3, 5 + 4. Things any adult would know, but not Rosie. She took the pencil with trembling hands. She tried to look at the numbers, but they seemed jumbled, out of order, senseless. "How do you do this one?" Grace asked, pointing to the paper. Rosie swallowed hard. She felt her throat tighten. She so wanted to help. She so wanted to be the mother who taught, who knew the answers, who didn't fail, but she wasn't. She never would be. "I'm sorry, sweetie. Mommy didn't go to school." The words came out low, almost inaudible. Grace looked at her mother, not fully understanding what that meant, but sensing there was something painful there. Rosie lowered her head, gripping the pencil tightly, trying to hide the shame that rose in her chest like a hot wave. It was then that a voice broke the silence. "Do you want some help?" Rosie lifted her head quickly. A man was standing there, a few steps away from them. He was tall, in a dark suit, his hair combed back. He had a serious face, but his eyes were kind. She recognized him instantly. Daniel, the owner of the building. Rosie had seen him from a distance a few times, always surrounded by important people, always too busy to notice someone like her. But there he was, standing, looking at her. Rosie felt her face heat up. She stood up quickly, nearly tripping over her own feet. Grace remained seated, looking at the man with curiosity. "I'm sorry, sir," Rosie said, her voice trembling. "I shouldn't have brought her. The daycare closed and I had no one to leave her with. I brought her with me early and then I'll take her to school. It won't happen again, I swear." Daniel raised his hand as if asking her to stop. "You don't need to apologize," but Rosie didn't stop. The words tumbled out in a rush, as if she needed to justify herself before he fired her. "She's been quiet. She's not bothering anyone. I was careful. Just for today. I promise. Tomorrow, I'll figure something out." "Rosie." His voice was firm but not angry. She stopped talking and looked at him, her shoulders tense, expecting the worst. "You don't need to apologize," he repeated. "I understand." Rosie blinked, confused. She hadn't expected that. She expected a scolding, expected to be called irresponsible, expected to lose her job, but not that. Daniel looked at Grace, who was still sitting on the floor with the notebook open on her lap. "Can I help with the homework?" Grace looked at her mother, asking for permission. Rosie was paralyzed. She didn't know what to say, didn't know if it was appropriate, but she couldn't say no either. She nodded slowly. Daniel knelt right there, on the floor, next to Grace. He took the notebook carefully. "May I see?" Grace handed it to him. He looked at the problems and smiled. "These are easy. I'll show you, okay?" He took the pencil and started to explain. His voice was calm, patient. He didn't talk as if Grace was stupid or slow. He talked as if she were capable of understanding anything, and she understood. "So it's like this?" the girl asked, trying to do the next problem on her own. "That's right, you're smart." Grace smiled, proud. She continued doing the problems, one by one, with Daniel beside her, watching and encouraging. Rosie stood there, motionless, watching it all. She didn't know what to feel. Gratitude? Yes. Shame? Also, relief? Definitely. But there was something more, something she couldn't name. For the first time in her life, someone was looking at her, not with pity, not with contempt, but with something that looked like humanity, as if she mattered, as if Grace mattered. And at the same time, she felt completely exposed, vulnerable, as if all her flaws were right there and on the floor, visible for anyone to see. Her illiteracy, her poverty, her inability to be the perfect mother she so desperately wanted to be. Daniel finished helping Grace and handed the notebook back. "There. You did very well." "Thank you, sir," Grace said, excited. He stood up and looked at Rosie. She shrank back, expecting something, a comment, a judgment, but he just said, "You're doing what you can, and you're doing it well." Rosie felt her eyes sting. She didn't cry. She wouldn't cry in front of him, but she almost did. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice low. Daniel gave a slight nod and continued down the hall, entering one of the offices. Rosie stood there, trying to process what had just happened. Grace tugged on the hem of her uniform. "Mum, he was nice, wasn't he?" Rosie looked at her daughter. She saw the wide smile, the bright eyes shining with happiness, and for the first time that day she felt that maybe things could be different, not better necessarily, just, different. She ran a hand through Grace's blonde hair. He was sweetie. He was very nice. And they went back to work. But something had changed. Rosie couldn't say what. She just knew that, in that moment, someone had seen her. Truly. Not as the janitor, not as the invisible woman, but as a person, a mother, someone who mattered. And she wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a scary thing. Maybe it was both. The next day, Rosie arrived at work earlier than usual. She had slept poorly. She spent the whole night thinking about what had happened, about the man who knelt on the floor to help Grace, about his words, about the way he looked at her. Grace was excited. On the way to the building, she wouldn't stop talking. "Mom, I think I understood the math. I'm going to show the teacher today." "That's great, sweetie. That man was so nice. He explained it so well." Rosie just nodded. She didn't know what to say. She felt gratitude, but also a strange discomfort, as if she had a debt she could never repay. When they arrived at the building, the security guard said good morning, and Grace answered cheerfully. They went up in the service elevator. Rosie left her bag in the closet and prepared her cart. Grace sat in the old chair with her notebook on her lap. "I'm going to be really quiet today, okay, Mom? I promise." "I know you will." Rosie started her work. She cleaned the entire 10th floor, then the 9th. Grace stayed in the closet drawing just as she had promised. Everything was normal. Everything was in its place. The routine was the same as always. Until, around 10 in the morning, Daniel appeared at the closet door. Rosie was putting some products on a shelf when she heard his voice. "Good morning." She turned around quickly, almost dropping a bottle of disinfectant. Her heart raced. "Good morning, sir." He was in a suit again, but without a tie. He seemed more relaxed than the day before. His hair was a little messy, as if he had run his hand through it several times. Grace got up from her chair, recognizing him immediately. "Good morning." Daniel smiled at the girl. "Good morning, Grace, and how are you?" "Good. I finished all my homework yesterday." "Really? That's great. I'm sure you did very well." He looked at Rosie, who was tense, her hands gripping the cleaning cloth without realizing it. "Can I speak with you for a minute?" Rosie swallowed hard. "Of course." Daniel looked at Grace with a calm smile. "Can you stay here for just a little bit? I want to talk to your mom." Grace nodded and sat back down, picking up her colored pencil. Rosie stepped out into the hallway, her heart pounding. She didn't know what to expect. Was he going to say she couldn't bring Grace anymore? Was he going to complain about something? Had someone commented and now he regretted it? But when he spoke, his voice was calm, even gentle. "I was thinking, if you don't mind, I'd like to invite Grace to see my office." Rosie blinked, confused. "Your office?" "Yes, it's on the top floor. It has a beautiful view of the city. I thought she might like it. And, well, I could help her with some more homework. If you'll let me, of course." Rosie didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to accept. Grace deserved to see beautiful things. She deserved to have someone who cared. She deserved to know a different world. But another part was afraid. Afraid that this was too good to be true. Afraid of getting used to something that could end at any moment. "Why are you doing this, sir?" Daniel hesitated. He scratched the back of his neck as if searching for the right words. He looked at the floor, then back at her. "I can't really explain it. I just know that yesterday, when I saw you two, I felt something. Something I haven't felt in a long time." "What?" "That I can be useful. Truly. Not with money or business. With something that matters." Rosie looked at him. She searched for insincerity, for ulterior motives, for any sign that this was a trap, but all she saw was sincerity, an almost painful sincerity. "Okay, she can go." Daniel smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his face. "Thank you. You can bring her up now if you want. I have a few minutes before my next meeting." They went back to the closet. Grace was drawing a red flower with large petals. "Grace, do you want to see Mr. Daniel's office?" The girl looked up, surprised. Her pencil froze in midair. "Can I?" "You can." Grace jumped up from the chair, excited. She grabbed her notebook and hugged it to her chest. Rosie took her daughter's hand and followed Daniel down the hallway. They went to the main elevator, not the service one. It was the first time Rosie had ever been in it. The elevator was mirrored, with dark wood trim and golden buttons. Grace stared at her own reflection, fascinated. She ran her hand over the mirror, watching the image move with her. "This is different from the other elevator," she said. "It is," Daniel confirmed. "This one is just for the upper offices." He pressed the button for the top floor. The ride was fast and silent. Rosie felt her stomach churn. She didn't know if it was because of the elevator or her nerves. When the doors opened, Grace took a small step forward and stopped. The top floor hallway was unlike anything else, wider, quieter. The floor was a light, almost shining marble. There were only two large doors, one on each side. Daniel opened the one on the right. "You can go in." Grace entered slowly, her eyes wide. Rosie stood at the door, unsure if she should enter or not. She felt like she was invading a space that wasn't hers. A world that wasn't hers. The office was enormous. It had a dark wood desk in the center, polished and gleaming. Bookshelves filled with books took up an entire wall. Leather armchairs were arranged near a coffee table. Everything was organized, clean, impeccable. But what drew the most attention were the windows. They took up the entire back wall, floor to ceiling. Clean glass, without a single smudge. And they showed the entire city below, stretching as far as the eye could see. Grace let go of Rosie's hand and walked slowly to the window. Each step was careful, as if she were afraid of breaking something. When she got close to the glass, she placed her hands on it and just stared, open-mouthed. "Wow, it's so beautiful up here." Her voice came out low, almost a whisper of pure awe. Daniel walked over to her, smiling. He put his hands in his pockets and stood beside the girl, looking at the same view. "It is, isn't it? I never get tired of this view. Sometimes, when work gets heavy, I stop and look outside. It helps clear my head. You can see everything. The buildings, the cars, the people walking. You can. And at night it's even more beautiful. The lights come on and it looks like the whole city is sparkling." Grace stood there, glued to the window, mesmerized. Her bright eyes reflected the sunlight streaming in. Rosie watched from a distance, still standing at the door. There was something in her daughter's eyes that she had never seen before. Wonder, yes, but also hope. As if, for the first time, Grace was seeing that the world was bigger than she had imagined, that there were high, beautiful places full of light, places she only saw from afar, from below, but was now inside. For the first time, her daughter saw the world from above. And Rosie realized that in that moment, Grace wasn't just looking. She was imagining herself there, part of it, part of that world that had always seemed so distant, so impossible. And that moved Rosie in a way she didn't expect. She felt pride. She felt fear. She felt hope. All at once, tight in her chest. Daniel moved away from the window and pulled a large, comfortable chair closer to the desk. "Come on, Grace. Sit here. Let's see what you need to study today." Grace reluctantly moved away from the window but obeyed. She sat in the chair, which was too big for her. Her feet didn't even touch the floor. She opened her notebook to a new page, full of enthusiasm. Daniel pulled up another chair and sat beside her. Not in front, not looking down, but beside her at the same level. What did the teacher assign today? More math and some words to read too. All right, let's start with the math then. He picked up a pencil from the desk and began to explain. His voice was patient, clear, unhurried. Grace paid attention to every word, frowning when she didn't understand, smiling when she solved a problem. Sometimes she asked questions. Sometimes she made mistakes. But Daniel never grew impatient, never sighed, never made her feel stupid. He just explained again in a different way until she understood. Rosie remained at the door, watching. She couldn't enter. She felt she didn't belong in that place, in that scene. But she couldn't leave either. She couldn't stop watching. There was something in the way Daniel treated Grace. It wasn't condescension. It wasn't pity. It was respect. Genuine respect for a 5-year-old child who was learning to add and subtract. After a while, Grace stopped writing. She looked at her notebook with a frown. She was quiet for a moment, fiddling with her pencil. "I have trouble," she said softly. Daniel stopped looking at the notebook and turned his face to her. "Trouble with what?" Grace fidgeted with her fingers, embarrassed. Her voice came out even softer. "With everything. Math, reading. I'm slower than the other kids at school." "So what?" The answer was so simple, so direct, that Grace looked up, surprised. "So I'm embarrassed to ask questions at school. The other kids already know. It's just me who doesn't." And then they laugh. Daniel placed the pencil on the desk. He turned his chair completely towards Grace and leaned forward a little. He looked into her bright eyes with a gentle seriousness, the kind that makes a person feel important. "Listen to me, Grace. It doesn't matter if you're slower. It doesn't matter if you don't know yet. What matters is that you want to learn, and that is the hardest part of all." Grace looked at him, still unsure but paying attention. "But what if I ask a dumb question?" "There's no such thing as a dumb question. There's curiosity, and curiosity is the smartest thing in the world. It's how we grow. It's how we learn." "Really? Really? And you know what else? The people who laugh at others for asking questions are the ones who are most afraid of looking like they don't know." "But you don't need to be afraid of that." Grace looked at him, processing his words. "What if I still don't get it?" "Then you ask again and again until you understand. With me, you can ask anything, anything at all, whenever you want, as many times as you need, okay?" Grace nodded slowly. A shy little smile appeared on her face. "Okay. Promise you'll ask when you don't know." "I promise." "Then let's continue." Daniel went back to explaining, and this time, Grace asked questions, several of them, without fear, without shame, and he answered every single one with the same patience, with the same respect. Rosie watched everything in silence. She felt her eyes sting. She felt a lump rise in her throat and tighten. She had never seen anyone look at Grace like that, with respect, with attention, with genuine interest, as if her daughter truly mattered, as if her questions were valid, as if she had value. All her life, Rosie fought alone, worked alone, raised Grace alone, and never asked for help because she never expected anyone to give it, because no one ever had, because people like her didn't get help. They got orders at best, or indifference. But here was a man she barely knew, a rich, important man who could be doing anything else. And he was sitting with her daughter, teaching, listening, caring. And that moved her in a way she didn't expect, in a way that was frightening. After almost an hour, Daniel looked at his wristwatch. "I think that's enough for today. You learned a lot, Grace." Grace closed her notebook, happy. Her eyes were shining. "Thank you, Mr. Daniel." "You can just call me Daniel." "Okay. Thank you, Daniel." He smiled. "You're welcome. We can continue tomorrow if you want. Sound good?" "Yes." Grace got up from the chair and ran to the window again. She stood there a little longer, looking at the city with the gaze of someone who still can't believe what they're seeing. Daniel approached Rosie, who was still at the door. "She's smart," he said quietly, just for Rosie to hear. Rosie nodded, her throat still tight. "Yes, she is. You must be very proud of her." "I am. She's all I have in the world." Daniel looked at her with an expression Rosie couldn't decipher. It wasn't pity, it wasn't cheap compassion, it was something deeper, more sincere, almost like admiration. "She's very lucky to have you." Rosie didn't know what to say. She lowered her head, trying to hide the emotion that threatened to overflow. Daniel didn't press. He just stood there, in silence, respecting the moment. Grace came running back, her eyes still shining. "Mom, did you see how beautiful it is here?" "I saw, sweetie. One day I'm going to work in a place like this. A really high place is where you can see everything." Rosie smiled, even with teary eyes. She ran a hand through her daughter's blonde hair. "You will. You'll achieve anything you want." "Really? Really?" They left the office. They went down in the elevator in silence. Grace couldn't stop talking about the view, about the math she learned, about how well Daniel explained things, about how beautiful it was up there. Rosie listened to it all, but her mind was far away. She thought about the way her daughter looked out the window, the hope she saw in Grace's bright eyes, the way she said that one day she would work in a place like that. And for the first time in a long time, Rosie felt something like hope, too. Maybe things could be different. Maybe Grace had a real chance. A chance to be more, to have more, to not repeat her mother's life, to not spend her whole life cleaning other people's offices, but maybe one day having her own, and all because of a man who decided to help. Without asking for anything in return, without judging, without looking down on them, just because he wanted to, because he thought he should, because he saw something in them that was worthwhile. 266. Rosie didn't know what that meant for the future. She didn't know if she could truly trust it. She didn't know how long it would last. But she knew one thing. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't alone. And that was terrifying. But it was also beautiful. Very beautiful. A week had passed since the first time Grace went up to the top floor. Since then, she went every day. Daniel always showed up mid-morning, invited the girl to his office, and stayed there for an hour teaching. Rosie continued her work as usual. She cleaned the floors, emptied the trash cans, wiped the desks. But now there was something different, a lightness she couldn't explain, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. That Friday morning, Grace woke up more excited than usual. She jumped off the sofa bed and ran to Rosie in the kitchen. "Mom, today's the day I show my homework to the teacher." "Is it?" "Yes, I did everything right. Daniel helped me yesterday." Rosie smiled as she prepared breakfast. For the past few days, Grace had talked a lot about Daniel. Daniel said this. Daniel explained that Daniel is nice. And Rosie let her, because she saw that her daughter was happy, was learning, was believing in herself. When they arrived at the building, Grace barely waited for Rosie to put her bag in the closet. She stood at the door, hopping from one foot to the other, anxious. "Is he here yet?" "Not yet, sweetie. It's early. He should be here soon. I want to tell him about school." "You will. Be calm." Grace sat in the little chair, but she couldn't stay still. She opened her notebook, closed it, opened it again, drew a line, stopped, looked down the hall. Rosie found it funny and also touching. Her daughter had formed a connection with Daniel, a real connection. When 10 o'clock came, Daniel appeared. He was in a grey suit, no tie, a leather briefcase in his hand, but when he saw Grace at the door of the supply closet, his face lit up. "Good morning." Grace jumped out of her chair and ran to him. "Daniel, Daniel, I have something to tell you." He knelt down to her level, smiling. "What is it?" "The teacher said I've improved a lot." She said it in front of the whole class. Grace's bright eyes shone with pride. Her cheeks were flushed with excitement. Daniel broke into a wide smile. "Really? That's amazing, Grace." "Really? She said my math was all correct, and that my reading has improved too. I knew you could do it. It was because of you. You helped me." Daniel shook his head. "It wasn't because of me, it was because of you. I just explained. You're the one who did the work." Grace looked at him, processing that. Then she smiled even wider. "But you helped. A lot." Rosie was standing at the closet door, watching everything. She felt her chest tighten with emotion. Seeing her daughter so happy, so confident, was something she had always wanted. But she never thought she would be able to give that to Grace, and now there it was. Grace grabbed the notebook she had left on the chair and ran back. "I made something for you. For me?" "Yes." She opened the notebook to a specific page and carefully tore out the sheet. Then she held it out to Daniel. "Here." Daniel took the paper. It was a drawing, made with colored pencils, with childish strokes but full of details. There were two figures holding hands. One was tall, in a suit. The other was small, with a blue dress and yellow hair. Underneath, written in crooked letters, was, "You are my friend." Daniel just stared at the drawing. He didn't say anything for a moment, just looked. His eyes grew shiny. His jaw tightened, as if he were swallowing something. "Grace, is this really for me?" "It is. I made it last night. Mom helped me write it." He ran his finger over the crooked letters, slowly, as if afraid of smudging them. "Thank you. Truly. This is the most beautiful gift I've ever received." Grace smiled, satisfied. "You really like it?" "I love it. Very much." He carefully folded the paper and put it in the inside pocket of his jacket, right near his chest. Grace hugged his leg tight. Daniel placed a hand on the girl's blonde head and stood there, still, as if wanting to save that moment. Rosie watched it all, and something inside her changed in that instant. She had always seen Daniel as the owner of the building, the boss, the rich man who lived in a different world, someone distant, someone she would never truly understand. But there, in that moment, she didn't see the boss. She didn't see the billionaire. She didn't see the man in the suit who ran companies. She saw a man who was moved by a child's drawing. A man who tucked that paper into his pocket as if it were a treasure. A man who knelt on the floor, who hugged Grace back, whose eyes were misty because of 3 crooked words written by a 5-year-old girl. For the first time, Rosie saw Daniel for who he really was. Human, vulnerable, lonely perhaps, searching for something that money couldn't buy. And that moved her, because it showed that deep down they weren't so different, her and him. 2 opposite worlds, but both searching for the same thing: connection, belonging, someone who mattered. Daniel stood up and cleared his throat, trying to compose himself. He looked at Grace with a smile that still held a bit of emotion. "Shall we go up? I have a surprise for you today." "A surprise? What surprise?" "If I tell you it's not a surprise." Grace laughed and took his hand. The two of them headed towards the elevator. Rosie followed them, as she always did, but this time her gaze was different, softer, more trusting. When they arrived at the office, Daniel asked Grace to wait a moment. He went to his desk and opened a drawer. He took out a small light blue box with a white ribbon. "This is for you." Grace's eyes widened. "For me?" "For you. For working so hard. For improving in school. For being you." Grace took the box with both hands, as if it was something fragile. She opened it slowly. Inside was a new pencil case, full of colored pencils. They weren't ordinary pencils. They were the professional kind, in every color imaginable. There were also erasers, sharpeners, and colored pens. Wow. Grace could barely speak. "Do you like it?" "Like it. I love it." "Thank you, Daniel." She dropped the box on the desk and ran to hug him again. Daniel picked her up, and Grace laughed, happy. Rosie felt her eyes sting. Not from sadness, from gratitude. She had never been able to give these things to Grace. Expensive colored pencils, new cases, nice supplies. It was always the basics, the cheapest, whatever she could afford with what was left at the end of the month. And here was a man giving this to her daughter, not because he had to, not because he wanted to show off, but because he cared, because he wanted to see Grace happy. Daniel put Grace back on the floor. "Now you can make even more beautiful drawings." "I will. I'll make a ton. I'll make one in every color," he laughed. It was a genuine, light laugh, different from the serious tone he usually had. Grace opened the case and started taking out the pencils one by one, looking at each color with wonder. Rosie approached Daniel. He looked at her, and for a moment, they stood there in silence. She wanted to say thank you, wanted to say that this meant more than he could imagine, wanted to say that he was changing her daughter's life, but the words wouldn't come. She could only smile, a small but sincere smile, and Daniel understood. He always understood. "She deserves it," he said, quietly. "She does," Rosie agreed. Grace was sitting on the floor, drawing with her new pencils. She hummed softly, happy, lost in her own world. Daniel and Rosie stood there, just watching. And in that moment, Rosie realized something. She realized she had let Daniel in, not just into Grace's life, but into hers too. He was no longer the distant boss. He was someone she respected, someone she trusted, someone she was beginning to see in a different light, and that was scary. But it was also warming because it had been a long time since she had felt this way. A long time since she had felt part of something bigger than herself. Grace got up from the floor and showed her new drawing. It was a house with 3 windows and a red door. In the sky, a huge yellow sun. "Look, this is my dream house." Daniel knelt down again. "How many bedrooms will it have?" 3. "One for me, one for my mom, and a guest room. And a yard, a huge yard with flowers and a tree to climb." Daniel smiled. "I'm sure you'll have a house like that one day." "Really? Really?" Grace hugged the drawing to her chest, dreaming. Rosie watched it all. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to dream too. To dream that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. That Grace could have that house, that life, that future, and that she, Rosie, could see her daughter achieve all of it, with the help of a man who appeared out of nowhere and changed everything. The next day, Rosie was cleaning the hallway on the 9th floor when Daniel appeared. He had just left a meeting. His tie was loose and he looked tired. But when he saw Rosie, his face lit up. "Rosie, can I talk to you?" She dropped the cloth in her cart and wiped her hands on her apron. "Of course." He hesitated for a moment, put his hand in his pocket, took it out, scratched the back of his neck. He was nervous. "I wanted to invite you and Grace to have lunch with me, today if you can." Rosie blinked in surprised. "Lunch? Yes, I know a quiet place, not too far from here. Nothing too formal. It would just be nice to spend some time with you outside of here." She didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to accept, but another part found it strange, inappropriate. "I don't know, sir. Daniel, you can call me Daniel. How many times do I have to ask?" he said with a smile. "Daniel," she repeated, the name feeling strange. "I don't think it's appropriate. People will talk." He frowned. "Talk about what?" "Well, you're the owner of the building. I'm the janitor. People talk. They make things up where there's nothing." Rosie knew well how the world worked. She knew that people like her didn't mix with people like him without judgment. Daniel took a step forward. His gaze was serious, but gentle. "I don't care what they say. I care about you." Rosie felt her face get hot. Those words stirred something in her she didn't expect. "But let people think whatever they want. I just want to have lunch with you, nothing more. You, Grace, and me, that's all." She looked at him. She searched for insincerity, but all she saw was sincerity. "Okay, we'll go." The smile he gave was genuine. "Great. I'll pick you up at noon." Grace was excited when she found out. She jumped, clapped her hands, and spun around the small supply closet. "Are we going to a real restaurant?" "Yes." "Can I bring my new pencils?" Rosie laughed and said, "Yes, but not to make a mess." "Daniel is so nice, isn't he, Mom?" "He is, sweetie, he is." Grace hugged Rosie's leg, and in that moment, Rosie realized how attached her daughter had become to Daniel, and how much that scared her. At noon, Daniel appeared at the closet. He had taken off his jacket and was just in a shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He looked more relaxed. His hair was a little messy, and Rosie liked him that way. More human. "Ready?" "Ready," Grace answered, excited. They went down in the main elevator. Rosie felt strange, as if she were invading a space that wasn't hers. But Daniel talked with Grace naturally, asking about school, about her drawings. The restaurant was 2 blocks from the building. It was small, with light wood tables and simple decor. It wasn't luxurious, it was cozy, the kind of place where you feel comfortable. Daniel chose a table near the window. The sunlight streamed in softly. Grace sat next to him, swinging her legs. Rosie sat across from them. A friendly waitress brought menus and filled their glasses with water. "You can order whatever you want," Daniel told Grace. "Anything." "Anything." Grace opened the menu with a serious expression. Rosie opened hers too, but felt a tightness in her chest. She had never been to a restaurant like this with Grace. Daniel noticed her discomfort. "Rosie, relax, it's just lunch, between friends." She nodded. They ordered their food. Grace chose pasta with tomato sauce and cheese. Rosie ordered grilled chicken with rice and salad. Daniel ordered the same as Rosie. While they waited, Grace started drawing on a napkin with one of her pencils. Daniel watched, smiling, making comments about the colors. Rosie drank her water slowly. After a while, Daniel looked at Rosie. "Can I ask you a question?" Rosie nodded, feeling her stomach tighten. "What about Grace's father?" She felt her chest constrict. She didn't like talking about it. "He died when she was still a baby." Daniel frowned, surprised. "I'm so sorry." "It was a work accident. He worked in construction, fell from a scaffold. He didn't survive." The words came out dry. It was the only way she could talk about it. Grace stopped drawing and looked at her mother. Rosie ran a hand through her blonde hair. "It's okay, honey. You can keep drawing." Grace turned her attention back to the napkin. Daniel was silent. "That must have been very hard." "It was. Life was hard. It was always just me and her. No family, no one to help. My parents had already passed away. I had no siblings, I had no one." She paused. "I worked wherever I could. Sometimes 2 jobs. Cleaning during the day, washing dishes at night. Slept 4-5 hours. Left Grace with a neighbor who charged very little. It was like that for years." Daniel listened attentively. He didn't interrupt. "And you did it," he said. "You raised her alone. You're raising her, and you're doing an incredible job. Grace is wonderful." "That's because of you." Rosie felt her eyes sting. "I just do what I can." "No, you're incredible." The food arrived. They ate in silence for a while. Grace was focused on her pasta. Rosie ate slowly. After a while, Rosie asked, "What about you? Do you have family?" Daniel paused. He put down his fork and looked out the window. "No, I don't. No one." He took a deep breath. "My mother died when I was 9. Cancer. It was fast. One day she was fine, laughing, taking me to school. A few months later, she was gone." Rosie felt her chest tighten. 9 years old. A child. "I'm so sorry." Daniel gave a sad smile. "My father, he was a cold man. Never knew how to deal with feelings. When my mother died, he didn't cry. He didn't talk about her. He didn't console me." His voice was controlled, but Rosie could feel the pain. "The day after the funeral, he sent me to a boarding school." Rosie's eyes widened. The day after, said it was for the best, that I needed a quality education, that he couldn't take care of me and the business at the same time. But I know the truth, he didn't want to deal with me. I reminded him too much of her." Grace had stopped eating. She looked at Daniel with compassion. "Didn't you have any friends?" she asked softly. Daniel looked at her and smiled, but it was sad. "I had classmates, but real friends, no. Everyone knew who I was, the son of the rich businessman, so they either wanted something or they were jealous. No one ever really saw me." He paused. "I grew up surrounded by luxury, the best schools, the best clothes, trips, expensive gifts, everything money could buy, but I never had affection, never had someone who truly cared. I never felt like I was a part of anything." Grace got down from her chair and hugged his arm. "But you have us now. You have me and Mom." Her voice was so sincere that Daniel had to look away. His eyes grew shiny. He cleared his throat. "I do, Grace. I have you too." He hugged the girl back. Rosie watched it all. She looked at him. She saw the man behind the suit. She saw the child who lost his mother and was abandoned by his father. She saw the loneliness he carried. "You seem like someone who carries the world and doesn't tell anyone," she said, softly. Daniel looked at her. Their eyes met. "Maybe because I never had anyone to tell." The words hung in the air. Rosie felt something shift inside her chest. Connection. And maybe something more. They finished lunch in silence. Grace went back to her seat, happy. Daniel paid the bill, even as Rosie protested. "It was my treat." They walked back to the building. Grace walked ahead, skipping. Daniel and Rosie walked behind. "Thank you for lunch," Rosie said. "No need to thank me. I really enjoyed it." She looked at him. "Why?" "Because it's rare to feel like I can be myself, without pretending, without having to be the businessman, the boss. With you, I'm just me, just Daniel." Rosie smiled. "Maybe that's what we need most in the world, a place to just be." Daniel stopped. He looked at her with intensity. That's exactly it. They stood there, just looking at each other, until Grace called out, "Come on!" They laughed and started walking again, but something had changed. A few days later, they met again. Daniel had come down to the 8th floor and saw Rosie cleaning a meeting room. Grace was with her, drawing. "May I come in?" Rosie turned around, happy. "Of course." He sat near them. Grace showed him her drawing, 3 people holding hands. He praised it, but then looked at Rosie. "You never told me much about yourself." "About before?" Rosie hesitated. "There's not much to tell." "I'm sure there is, and I want to hear it." She sighed. She sat near him, looked at her own rough hands. "I was born poor, very poor, in a small town. My parents worked in the fields, sun up to sundown. They never had an education, never learned to read properly. And neither did I." Daniel listened in silence. "I started working when I was little. I helped my mom clean houses. I was 8, 9 years old. I never really studied, never had a choice. It wasn't about wanting to. It was about surviving." She paused. "When I turned 15, I left home. I came to the big city looking for a better life, alone without knowing anyone." "Alone?" Daniel seemed shocked. "Alone? I worked everywhere. Cleaning, kitchens, laundromats, slept in cheap boarding houses, ate the bare minimum, saved every penny. I met Grace's father when I was 22, got married. I thought things would get better, and for a while they did. We were happy, simple but happy, but then he died, and I was alone again, except now, with a baby." Her voice was calm, but there was sadness in it. "I lived to survive, that was it. I had no time to dream, no time to want more. It was just work, sleep, wake up, and work again." Daniel took her hand. "And now?" Rosie looked at him. "Now, I don't know. I still survive. I still wake up early, work all day, come home tired. But for the first time, I feel like maybe there's something more. Because of Grace. Because of you, too." He squeezed her hand. "I feel good with you, I really do. It's different from anything I've ever known. With you, I feel complete." Rosie looked into his eyes. She saw sincerity. She saw vulnerability. "Maybe that's what we need most in the world," she repeated, with a sweet smile. "A place to just be." Daniel squeezed her hand again. "Then we've found it." Grace looked at them and smiled. She sensed that something beautiful was being born there. For the first time in years, Rosie allowed herself to believe that maybe she deserved this, deserved to be seen, deserved to be cared for, deserved to have someone who mattered. And Daniel deserved it too, deserved to have a family, deserved to have a place to come home to, deserved to have someone who looked at him not for what he had, but for who he was. They stayed there holding hands, with Grace drawing beside them. And in that moment, the 3 of them knew. They knew something had changed. Forever. Rosie woke up in the middle of the night to a low moan. She opened her eyes in the darkness, and it took a few seconds to understand where the sound was coming from. Then she heard it again. "Mom!" She got up quickly from the sofa bed and ran to Grace. The girl was lying down, but tossing and turning restlessly. Rosie placed a hand on her forehead and felt her heart race. It was hot, very hot. "Grace, are you okay?" "It hurts, Mom. Everything hurts." Rosie turned on the lamp. Grace's face was too flushed, her eyes bright with fever. She was breathing fast, panting. "Wait here, sweetie. Let me get the thermometer." Rosie ran to the bathroom, her hands shaking so much she nearly dropped everything from the cabinet. She grabbed the old thermometer she kept there and ran back. She put it under Grace's arm and waited. Every second felt like an eternity. When she looked, the thermometer read 103 degrees. "It's too high, Grace. We need to bring it down." She grabbed a towel, soaked it in cold water, and started wiping the girl's face and neck. Grace whimpered softly, turning her head, trying to escape the cold. "It's cold, Mom." "I know, honey, but we need to bring the fever down." Rosie continued for a few minutes, but the fever didn't break. On the contrary, Grace was getting hotter, more restless. She started shivering, her lips turning purple. "Mom, I'm cold." "I know, sweetie. It's the fever. Just wait a little longer." But the fever didn't subside. Grace began to moan louder, writhing in the bed. Rosie looked at the clock on the wall. 4 in the morning. There were no buses at this hour. She didn't have enough money for a taxi, and the local clinic didn't open until 7. Grace moaned again, louder this time, and started to cry. Rosie felt panic rise in her throat like a wave. She didn't know what to do. She had never felt so helpless, so alone in her life. That's when she thought of Daniel. She hesitated. Could she call him in the middle of the night? Was it appropriate? He had given her his number, but did he expect to be woken up like this? But she looked at Grace, shivering, crying, moaning in pain, and she no longer cared about what was appropriate or not. She picked up her old cell phone with trembling hands and dialed the number he had given her a few weeks ago. "For anything," he had said, "any time." The phone rang, once, twice, 3 times. Rosie started to think he wouldn't answer, that he had turned his phone off for the night. But on the 4th ring, his sleepy voice came on the line. "Hello?" "Daniel." Rosie's voice came out shaky, broken. "I'm sorry to call at this hour. It's Grace. She's not well." There was a brief silence. Just a second. Then his voice changed completely. It became alert, awake. "What happened?" "She has a very high fever, 103. She's shivering. She's crying. I don't know what to do. I have no way to get her to the hospital right now. There are no buses, no... I'm on my way. Give me the address." "But you don't have to..." "Rosie, give me the address, now." She gave it to him, her voice still trembling. Daniel hung up without another word. Rosie sat there next to Grace, wiping her daughter's face with the cold towel, praying softly. Grace opened her eyes with difficulty. "Who was that, Mom?" "It was Daniel. He's coming to get us." "Daniel?" Grace tried to smile, but she was too weak. "He's nice." "He is, sweetie. He's very nice. Now close your eyes and rest." Less than 15 minutes later, there was an urgent knock on the door. Rosie opened it. Daniel was there, in a dark sweatshirt and sneakers, his hair completely messy, his eyes still sleepy but full of worry. He came in quickly. "Where is she?" "Here." He went to Grace and knelt beside the bed. He put his hand on the girl's forehead and frowned. "She's burning up. We need to go to the hospital. Right now." He carefully picked Grace up in his arms, as if she were made of glass. The girl rested her head on his shoulder, weak, her eyes half closed. Rosie grabbed her purse, stuffed her phone and wallet inside, and followed them out the door. Daniel's car was parked in front of the building, the engine still running. He gently settled Grace in the back seat, and Rosie got in with her, pulling her daughter onto her lap, holding her tight. Daniel got in the front and sped off. The hospital was 20 minutes away. Daniel drove fast but carefully, avoiding potholes, speeding through yellow lights. Rosie held Grace, whispering words of comfort that even she didn't believe. The girl barely responded, just moaned softly. When they arrived, Daniel picked Grace up again and practically ran to the entrance. Rosie could hardly keep up with him. "I need help here," he yelled as soon as he passed through the automatic doors. "Child with a very high fever." A nurse came running, looked at Grace and shouted for a doctor. They took the girl to an emergency room. Rosie tried to follow, but the nurse held up a hand. 5 to 68. "You need to wait here, ma'am. Just a minute." "But she's my daughter." "I know. But you can come in shortly. Let us stabilize her first. It will be quick." Rosie stood frozen in the hallway, her legs shaking so badly she could hardly stand. Daniel placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "She's going to be okay. Let's sit over there and wait." They sat in hard plastic chairs in the cold hospital corridor. Rosie put her head in her hands and began to cry softly. Daniel sat beside her, in silence. He didn't say everything would be okay. He didn't tell her not to worry. He didn't offer any comforting lies. He just stayed there, present, solid. After half an hour that felt like 3, the doctor came out, pulling off his gloves. "Grace's mother," Rosie shot up. "That's me. How is she? Is she okay?" "She's stable now. The fever was from a respiratory infection. We've already given her an antibiotic and a fever reducer. She'll need to stay here for 2 or 3 days for observation and to finish the IV antibiotics. But she's going to be okay. Yes, you brought her in time. If you had waited longer, it could have gotten complicated. But now we just need to monitor her progress." Rosie felt her legs give way. Daniel held her firmly by the arm, keeping her from falling. "Can I see her?" "You can. She's awake. Calm her. The fever has already started to come down." Rosie entered the room on shaky legs. Grace was lying in a bed that was too small, with an IV in her arm and an oximeter on her finger. She looked so small, so fragile in that all-white place. But when she saw her mother, she tried to smile. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, my love. How are you?" "Better. It doesn't hurt anymore." Rosie held her daughter's hand tightly, trying not to cry again. Daniel came in behind her, staying near the door, giving them space. "Hi, Grace," he said, his voice soft. "Hi, Daniel. Did you bring me here?" "I did. You were very sick, but you're going to get better now. Thank you for bringing me." "You're welcome. I'll always take you wherever you need to go." The doctor returned and explained the details. Grace needed to rest, take the antibiotics properly, and in a few days she would be home again. Rosie stayed by the bed, holding her daughter's hand as if it were an anchor. Daniel offered to get coffee, water, anything, but Rosie said she didn't want anything. She wasn't leaving. Daniel sat in an uncomfortable chair on the other side of the bed. He stayed there, quiet, just watching. He didn't complain, didn't look at his watch, didn't check his phone every minute. The hours passed slowly. Grace slept most of the time. Rosie also dozed off sometimes, her head falling to the side, but she would wake up at every noise, every movement from her daughter, every beep from the monitor. Daniel didn't leave. He didn't go home. He stayed there all night, and all morning too. When the sun was high, a nurse came in to change the IV and check her vitals. Grace woke up with the movement. She looked better. Her face was no longer so flushed, her breathing was calmer. "Good morning, dear," the nurse said, smiling. "How are you feeling?" "Better." "Great. The fever has come down a lot. You're a little warrior." After the nurse left, Grace looked at Rosie, then at Daniel. They both had deep, dark circles under their eyes, tired, in wrinkled clothes. "You stayed here all night." "We did," Rosie said, stroking her daughter's blonde hair. But you didn't both have to stay. We wanted to, Daniel said. Grace was quiet for a moment, processing. Did you miss work because of me? I didn't miss anything. Work can wait. You can't. But you had a meeting this morning. I remember you mentioned it. Daniel smiled tiredly. I cancelled everything. It's not important. But your work is important. You are more important than any meeting, Grace. The girl looked at him with those bright eyes, and Rosie saw them well up with tears. During the afternoon, Grace improved a lot. Her fever had dropped to 99 still, and she managed to eat a little soup and jello. Rosie became calmer, less tense. Daniel stayed there, sitting in the same uncomfortable chair, sometimes reading something on his phone, sometimes just watching Grace sleep. In the evening, Rosie tried to convince him to go home and rest. Daniel, you need to go home. Take a shower, get some proper sleep. You've already done so much. I'll stay with her. I'm fine here. I don't mind staying, but you have to work tomorrow. You have responsibilities. I can handle it from home if needed. Don't worry. Rosie didn't insist anymore. Deep down, she was relieved not to be alone, to have someone there with her. Night fell slowly. The hospital grew quieter, just the sound of footsteps in the hall and the beeping of machines. Grace was sleeping soundly now, her breathing calm and regular. Rosie dozed in the chair next to the bed, her head lolling to the side. Daniel sat on the other side, looking out the small window. Suddenly, Grace stirred. She opened her eyes slowly, blinking against the dim light of the room. Daniel? He turned quickly, leaning forward. Hi. Are you okay? Are you in pain? No. I'm okay. I just woke up. Do you want some water? Yes. He took the cup from the small table and helped her drink, holding her head carefully. Grace took a few sips and lay back down, but she kept looking at him. Daniel? Yes? Can I tell you something? You can tell me anything. Always. Grace hesitated. She fidgeted with her fingers, looked at the ceiling, then back at him. I wish I had a dad like you, someone who would teach me, who would take care of me. Daniel felt his throat close up completely. He was quiet for a long moment, trying to find the right words, trying not to fall apart. Grace, my dad died when I was a baby. I don't even remember him. My mum shows me pictures sometimes, but I don't remember. I always wanted a dad, someone to take me on outings, to help me with my homework, to stay with me when I was sick, someone who cared about me. She looked at him with those bright, sincere, vulnerable eyes. You do all of that. You're nice to me. You teach me. You came when I was sick. You really care. I wish you were my dad. Daniel swallowed hard. He felt his eyes sting, his vision blurring. He held Grace's small hand between his, squeezing it gently. And I, his voice came out hoarse, broken, and I always wanted a daughter. I just didn't know it until I met you. Grace's eyes widened. Really, really, you made me realize what was missing in my life. And it was you. It was this, having someone to take care of, someone to teach, someone to love, someone who made me want to be a better person. You're already good. I'm better with you around. You made me understand what a real family is. Grace squeezed his hand, her eyes shining. Thank you for staying here with me, for not leaving. I will always stay. Whenever you need me, I'll be here, I promise. You really promise? I promise. You can count on me forever. Rosie was awake. She had heard every word. She sat quietly in the chair, her eyes closed, pretending to be asleep, but silent tears streamed down her face. She heard everything. She felt every emotion cross the room. And in that moment, she knew. She knew that something definitive had happened there. A bond had been forged in that hospital room, in the middle of the night, between a sick little girl and a man who had come running when she needed him. A bond that had no official name, that had no signed papers, that had no formal promises made before witnesses, but it had truth. It had love. It had real commitment. And that was stronger than any contract, more solid than any document. Daniel wasn't Grace's biological father, but he was the father she had chosen with her heart. And Grace wasn't his biological daughter, but she was the daughter he had chosen too, without a second thought. And Rosie, for the first time since her husband died, was no longer carrying everything alone. It was no longer just her against the whole world. It was her, Grace, and Daniel. A strange family, improbable, unconventional, but real. Very real. Grace fell back asleep, her hand still holding Daniel's tightly. He sat there, looking at her with a tenderness Rosie had never seen on anyone's face. Rosie slowly opened her eyes and met his gaze. They said nothing. They didn't need to. Everything had changed that night, and they both knew there was no going back. There was no undoing it, no pretending it didn't exist. The bond was created, solid, true, definitive. And for the first time in a long time, Rosie felt true peace. She felt that everything was in its right place, that Grace would be okay, that they would be okay. Because now they had someone, they had each other, and that was all that mattered. A few days after Grace was discharged from the hospital, life returned to normal, or almost, because something had changed, something deep that couldn't be ignored. Grace was better, running around the house, drawing again, slowly getting back to school. Rosie went back to work, but she felt something different in her chest, a calm that wasn't there before, a certainty that she was no longer alone, and Daniel kept showing up, every day, sometimes at the building, sometimes calling to see how Grace was, sometimes showing up at the apartment with some silly excuse just to see them both. On a Thursday afternoon, he called Rosie. "Can you talk for a bit today after work? Did something happen?" "No, I just need to talk to you. It's important." Rosie felt her heart speed up. Important. What could it be? "Okay, Grace is with me here. Do you want to come to the apartment?" "I do. Can it be at 6? "It can." He hung up. Rosie stared at her phone, trying to guess what he wanted to talk about. Would it be something good? Something bad? Was he going to say he had overstepped? That he needed space? That things had gone too far? The rest of the day passed slowly. Rosie could barely concentrate on her work. She cleaned the rooms on autopilot, her mind elsewhere. Grace noticed her mum was acting strange. "Mum, are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetie. Just thinking about some things." "About what?" "Nothing important. Come on, let's finish up here and go home." When they got to the apartment, Rosie gave Grace a bath, prepared a simple snack, and tried to tidy the already tidy house. At 6 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. Rosie opened the door. Daniel was there, in jeans and a simple white shirt, no suit, no tie. He looked younger like this, more approachable. Hi. Come in." He came in. Grace ran up and jumped on him. "Daniel, you're here." "I am. How are you?" "Good. Look, I already finished all my homework for the week." "Really? I'm so proud." "You're so smart." Grace smiled, proud. Daniel walked into the small living room and sat on the sofa. Rosie sat in the chair across from him. Grace stayed on the floor, drawing. "Want some water? Coffee?" Rosie asked. "No need. Thank you." He was quiet for a moment. He seemed nervous. Rosie had never seen him nervous. He always seemed so confident, so in control. "Rosie, I need to tell you something." She felt her stomach tighten. "Go on." He took a deep breath. He looked at Grace, who was drawing peacefully, then back at Rosie. "These last few months, you've changed my life. I know it sounds like an exaggeration, but it's true. I was living on autopilot, work, meetings, more work. I didn't feel anything. I had no real purpose. I just accumulated money, closed deals, and at the end of the day came home to an empty house." Rosie listened in silence. "When I met you, everything changed. For the first time, I felt like I had a reason to wake up, A reason that wasn't money or success. It was seeing Grace learn. It was talking to you. It was being part of something real. He paused, gathering his courage. I know I'm not her father. I know I have no official right, but I want to secure Grace's future. She changed me, Rosie. She made me want to be better. And I want to give back. Rosie felt her eyes sting. Daniel, let me finish, he asked, his voice soft but firm. I want to pay for her education. Private school supplies everything she needs. I want her to have the opportunities I had, so she can be whatever she wants to be. A doctor, a teacher, an engineer, whatever she dreams of. And I want to be present, not as an obligation, but because I want to. Because she's important to me. Rosie tried to speak, but her voice wouldn't come out. Tears streamed down her face. You don't have to answer now. I just wanted you to know that I'm not going to disappear, that you can count on me. Rosie wiped her tears with the back of her hand. Daniel, you're already part of our lives. He looked at her, surprised. I am. You are. You're not a stranger who shows up once in a while. You're here every day. You take care of Grace. You care about her, about us. You're already part of our lives, and we don't want you to leave. Daniel felt his throat tighten. I don't want to leave either. Ever. Rosie smiled through her tears. Then stay. I'll stay. Grace, who had overheard part of the conversation, dropped her pencil and looked at them both. Is Daniel going to live with us? Rosie laughed. No, sweetie, but he's going to keep coming here, always. Every day? Every day he can. Grace got up and went to Daniel. Do you promise? He took her small hand. I promise. Okay then. Daniel took a deep breath. He looked at Grace. Grace, come here. Sit next to me. I want to tell you something. She sat on the sofa beside him, curious. Rosie moved closer, sitting on the other side. Daniel looked at the girl seriously, but with affection. Grace, you can be anything you want in life. You are very intelligent, very smart. And I want to help you achieve all your dreams. How? I'm going to take care of your education. I'm going to pay for a good school for you, where you'll learn even more things, where you can discover what you love to do. And when you grow up, if you want to go to college, I'll pay for that too, so you can study whatever you want. Grace's eyes widened. Really? Really? You just need to work hard. Study. Do your homework. And I'll be here to help you whenever you need. But why? Why do you want to do this for me? Daniel smiled. Because you deserve it, and because I love you. The words came out naturally. Simple. True. Grace stared at him for a moment. Then she jumped into his lap, hugging him tightly. I love you too, Daniel. He hugged her back, tight. His eyes closed. Rosie watched it all, the tears now falling freely. She didn't try to hide them, didn't try to wipe them away, just let them fall. After a while, Grace let go of Daniel and looked at him with those bright eyes full of enthusiasm. So I can be whatever I want. You can. Even an astronaut, he laughed. Even an astronaut, or a vet, or a vet, or a teacher like mine. Or a teacher. Whatever you want, Grace. The world is yours. She smiled, enchanted by the possibilities. She went back to the floor and picked up her drawing notebook. I'm going to draw all the things I can be when I grow up. Rosie and Daniel sat there on the sofa in silence. After a while, Rosie took his hand. He looked at her and she looked back. They didn't need to say anything. The look said it all. Respect. For everything he was doing. For who he was. Gratitude. For coming into their lives when they needed it most. Trust that he wouldn't disappear. That this was for real. And maybe something more. Something neither of them yet had the courage to name. But it was there. Growing, getting stronger. Daniel squeezed her hand back. Thank you for letting me be a part of this. Thank you for wanting to be a part. They stayed there for another hour. Grace showed him all her drawings, talked about school, about her friends, and about everything. Daniel listened to everything attentively, asking questions, laughing, encouraging. Rosie prepared a simple dinner: rice, beans, chicken. Nothing fancy, but Daniel ate as if it were the best food in the world. "You cook well," he said. "It's simple. Simple is good. It's real." After dinner, Grace started yawning. Rosie gave her a bath, put on her pajamas, and the girl said goodbye to Daniel with a tight hug. "Are you coming tomorrow?" "I am. I always come." "Promise?" "I promise." Grace went to bed satisfied. Rosie returned to the living room. Daniel was still there, sitting on the sofa. "Do you want to stay a little longer?" she asked. "I do. If you don't mind." "I don't mind." They sat down again. They talked about small things, about Rosie's work, about how well Grace was recovering, about the future. They didn't talk about big things, just about the day-to-day, the ordinary, the simple. And it was perfect that way. When it was past 10, Daniel got up. "I should go. I have to wake up early tomorrow." "Okay." Rosie walked him to the door. He paused before leaving. "Rosie?" "Yes. Thank you. For trusting me. For letting me be close to you. It means everything to me. You deserve to be here. You're important to us." He smiled. A genuine smile that lit up his tired face. "See you tomorrow." "See you tomorrow." He left. Rosie closed the door and leaned against it. She took a deep breath. She felt her chest full of something she couldn't name. It wasn't just gratitude. It wasn't just relief. It was something deeper. It was hope. It was peace. It was the feeling that finally, after so long fighting alone, she had someone by her side. Someone who stayed. Someone who wouldn't disappear at the first sign of trouble. She went to the bedroom. Grace was sleeping peacefully, hugging her old teddy bear. Rosie sat on the edge of the bed and stroked her daughter's blonde hair. "We're going to be okay, sweetie," she whispered. "We're going to be okay." And for the first time in years, she truly believed it. Because now they had more than hope. They had Daniel and he had them. And that was stronger than any hardship that might come their way. Time passed, not the way it used to, heavy and dragging. Now it passed differently, lighter, more full of meaning. 6 months had passed since that conversation in the apartment. 6 months since Daniel had promised to be present. And he kept his promise, every single day. The routine had completely changed, but in a good way. Every morning at 7 o'clock sharp, Daniel would show up at the apartment. He'd have breakfast with them. A simple breakfast, bread and butter, sometimes a scrambled egg. Nothing fancy, but it was the best breakfast he had ever had in his life. Then he would take Grace to school. The new private school he had enrolled her in 2 months ago. Grace loved it. She had made new friends, learned new things every day, came home excited, telling them about her classes, her teachers, about everything. Daniel would pick her up in the late afternoon. Sometimes he'd take her to the nearby park, sometimes to the corner ice cream shop. Sometimes they'd just go straight back to the apartment, where Rosie was already waiting with dinner almost ready. And every night, after eating, he would help Grace with her homework. They would sit at the small kitchen table, notebooks spread out, and he would explain with infinite patience, math, English, science, history, everything. Grace had improved so much. Her grades had gone up significantly. The teacher sent notes praising her performance, her dedication, her progress, and Grace was confident in a way she had never been before. She was no longer embarrassed to ask questions, no longer afraid to make mistakes. Rosie had changed too. With Daniel's support, she had started to really study. At night, after Grace was asleep, she would sit at the table with the literacy books he had bought her. He would sit beside her and teach, letter by letter, word by word, sound by sound. It was hard, very hard. Rosie was over 30 and had never learned properly. But she tried every day. And Daniel had infinite patience with her too. "Try again," he would say softly, without any judgment. "You can do it. I know you can." And she would try. And little by little she succeeded. She could already read simple sentences. She could already write her own name without any mistakes. She could already read the notes from Grace's school by herself. And that was a huge victory. Meals became sacred. Every day the three of them had dinner together. It didn't matter how busy Daniel was at work. He always showed up. Sometimes Rosie cooked. Sometimes Daniel brought takeout. Sometimes they ordered pizza and ate in the living room, watching a cartoon that Grace chose. It wasn't about the food. It was about being together, about sharing their day, about telling the small victories and the small problems, about belonging to something bigger. And the silences had changed too. Before, silence was discomfort. It was heavy loneliness. Now, silence was peace. They could spend hours without talking, just existing in the same space, and it was okay. It was more than okay. Grace would draw on the living room floor. Rosie would fold laundry on the sofa. Daniel would read a work report, and everything was right. There was no need to fill the silence with empty words just for the sake of it. Affection was daily, small, but constant and real. Daniel would run his hand through Grace's hair every time he passed her. Rosie would touch his arm when she needed to get his attention. Grace would hug them both for no apparent reason, just because she wanted to, just because she felt like it. They were simple gestures, everyday ones, but they meant everything. Daniel had visibly changed too. At work, he delegated more tasks. He left earlier than before. He declined meetings that clashed with the time he had to pick Grace up from school. His employees found it strange at first, but he didn't care one bit, because for the first time in his life, he had real priorities. It wasn't money, it wasn't status, it wasn't closing another deal. It was Grace laughing on the park swings. It was Rosie reading her first sentence alone, with tears in her eyes. It was having dinner as a family, the three of them squeezed around the small table. It was truly belonging. On a Friday afternoon, the three of them were in the living room. Rosie was preparing dinner in the small kitchen. Daniel was sitting on the sofa, answering some emails on his phone. Grace was on the floor, drawing as she always did. "Done," she said suddenly, holding up the paper with enthusiasm. "Done with what, sweetie?" Daniel asked, looking up from his screen. "My drawing. Want to see?" "Of course I do. I always want to see." Grace got up and walked over to him with quick steps. She handed him the paper with a wide smile that lit up her whole face. Daniel took it carefully and looked. It was a simple drawing, made with colored pencils. Three people holding hands, smiling, a woman with long brown hair, a little girl with blonde hair and a blue dress, a tall man in a blue shirt and black pants. Underneath, written with care and dedication, was "When my family." Daniel stared at the drawing, unable to blink. He couldn't say anything for a long moment. His throat had closed up completely. "Grace." His voice came out hoarse, emotional. "Do you like it?" she asked, excited, hopping from one foot to the other. "I love it. It's the most beautiful drawing you've ever made." "It's my family," she repeated with pride, pointing to the figures. "This is Mommy, this is me, and this is you." "That's me?" "Yes, you're part of my family now. You have been for a while." Daniel felt his eyes truly sting. He pulled Grace onto his lap and hugged her tight, with force, as if he wanted to save that moment forever. "Thank you, Grace. Thank you for letting me be a part." Rosie had come out of the kitchen upon hearing the conversation and was standing at the door watching everything. Her eyes were misty too. She wiped her hands on her apron and approached. Grace let go of Daniel and looked at him with those bright eyes full of pure sincerity. "You're my dad now, right?" Daniel hesitated for only a second. He glanced quickly at Rosie, seeking guidance, permission. She nodded slightly, smiling through her tears. "If you want me to be, then yes, I'm your dad. I really want you to be. Can I call you Dad? He had to clear his throat twice before he could answer. You can call me whatever you want, Grace. Okay then, you're my dad. She said it with such naturalness, such simplicity, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. And maybe it was, because family wasn't about blood. It never was. It was about choice, about being present, about true and consistent love. Grace jumped off his lap, satisfied, and went back to her drawings on the floor. Daniel stayed there, holding that piece of paper with both hands, looking at it as if it were the most precious object in the entire universe. Rosie approached slowly and sat next to him on the sofa. She looked at the drawing too, her head tilted. She truly loves you, Rosie said softly. I love her too, and you. You both changed everything. Rosie looked at him. Daniel looked back, and in that gaze, there was everything. Everything they didn't need to say out loud because it was already obvious, already established. This is all I ever wanted, he said, his voice still thick with emotion. I just didn't know where it was. I spent my whole life searching for something that made real sense, for something that made me feel whole, and it was here all along, with you two. Rosie took his hand firmly. She intertwined her fingers with his. He squeezed back hard. We love you too, she said finally, putting into words what had been obvious for months. Daniel turned his face completely towards her. His eyes were red, but they were the happiest eyes she had ever seen. He didn't say anything else. He just slowly tilted his head and gently rested his forehead against hers. They stayed like that for a long moment, quiet, connected, complete. Grace looked up at them from the floor and smiled, satisfied. She went back to drawing something else, happy and calm. They didn't say anything more in that moment. They didn't need to, because now, finally, after so long searching alone, the three of them had found it. Rosie had found someone who truly stayed, who wouldn't leave at the first sign of trouble, who loved her daughter as if she had always been his own. Grace had found a real father, someone who taught with patience, who cared with affection, who was present every single day, someone she could always count on in any situation. And Daniel had found a real family, not the one he was born into, cold and distant and empty, but the one he chose with his heart, the one that chose him back without hesitation. They belonged to each other now, not by social obligation, not by convention, not by a signed paper, but by conscious choice, by genuine love, by absolute truth. And that was stronger than any blood tie. That was real. That was forever. Rosie held Daniel's hand even tighter. He looked at her and smiled, a small smile, but it said everything. Grace continued drawing on the floor, softly humming a song from school. And there, in that small living room of a simple apartment, the three of them knew exactly where they belonged. Together. Finally. Completely together.